letter to the President. The letter informs the President that on the 15th of September we handed in a formal request to Premier Alan Winde that he call a referendum to determine the democratic will of the Western Cape people and to find out whether they wish for the Western Cape to break away from the Republic of South Africa and to form a new sovereign state. We're asking three things of the President. Firstly, we're asking that he respects and honours both the letter and the spirit of the South African and Western Cape Constitution.
Now, good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. I am Thabo Mdluli. There are calls for the Western Cape province to become an independent state from South Africa, a formal request by the Cape Independence Advocacy Group asking President Cyril Ramaphosa to consider a referendum on whether the province can break away from the rest of South Africa. The referendum is supported by parties including the Cape Independence Party, Freedom Front Plus and the African Christian Democratic Party. But parties like Jama-ah are opposed to the idea. What is your view tonight? Are there grounds for such a move? And you can be a part of this conversation tonight and take your comments and questions live on 072-110-5584. Or you can tweet us at Newzroom 405 if you wish to give us your view tonight. Send that WhatsApp. We'll get in touch with you. Joining me tonight to talk about this is Cape Independence Party leader Jack Miller, Jama-ah leader Ganief Hendricks, Freedom Front Plus Western Cape leader Dr. Corne Mulder, as well as Nokuzola Kolwapi, leader of Ikhwezi Political Movement. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Jack, as part of that group of independent movement parties calling for this, you have handed in your petition. Have you gotten any response from the President on the contents of your petition?
Well, we haven't personally had a response from the President, but this is something that we at the Cape Independence Party have been pushing for 14 years now, since 2007. And we believe it's an idea whose time has come. You know, I think people saw the riots up in KwaZulu-Natal a few weeks ago and the government's complete inability to prevent this type of violence from being spilled out onto the streets and on South African citizens. And I think the people of the Western Cape, they don't want that type of chaos here in the Cape. And we believe that the way we can put an end to this failing centralized government is to take back political and economic control over our own affairs and to declare the Western Cape an independent country.
On what basis do you justify this particular request?
Well, there's a varied number of bases. You know, the first I mentioned is obviously the corruption that we see in the South African government, the inability for the state to protect citizens like we saw in KwaZulu-Natal. And frankly, we've got a big problem here in the Western Cape in the form of the Democratic Alliance. Just as the ANC governs South Africa with complete authoritarian control without anyone to contest or negotiate with them, here in the Western Cape for the last 2 decades, the DA has had a stranglehold on politics. And unfortunately, they've used their platform here to try to get ANC voters outside of the Western Cape. In fact, many people call the DA ANC light. So our problem here in the Cape is to drive the DA underneath 50%. So we, parties like the Cape Independence Party and Dr. Mulder's Freedom Front and ACDP, etc., we can then force the DA to negotiate with us on these various issues. And probably the most important issue, in addition to what I've just mentioned, is something called the Division of Revenue Act. And this is the amount of taxes that we pay here in the Western Cape to the national government, which is controlled by the ANC, and how much we get back. We pay every single year a total of about 200 billion rand in taxes. The National Treasury gives us back to the Western Cape on our local and provincial allocation a mere 50 billion rand. We are losing direct access to 150 billion rand. We're losing direct access to 75% of our taxes. So this is probably one of the most important issues that we need to address. And the ANC is failing us on this, and the DA is failing us on this. And the only way that we can fix this mess is by controlling our own political and economic affairs here in the Western Cape.
So a large share of your taxes collected in the Western Cape, you say, should stay in the Western Cape. Of course, questions around protection of the citizens of the Western Cape and the corruption. How do you plan to get around the legal framework of the country? Section 1 of the Constitution says the establishing of South Africa is established as a constitutional, sovereign, democratic state. Section 3 says there will be a common South African citizenship and that national legislation must regulate the acquisition and loss of citizenship. But also, it speaks about self-determination within a territorial entity in the Republic or in other way determined by the national legislation. How do you plan legally to get around that?
Well, frankly, you mentioned Section 235, which is a very important part of the Constitution, and Dr. Mulder is also obviously keenly aware of this, and the South African government is keenly aware of this. They know about Section 235, and more than that, South Africa is also a bound signatory to the African Union as well as the United Nations. There are literally pages and pages of charters which guarantee our basic human rights. And one of those basic human rights is self-determination. And as you mentioned, it is in our Constitution. Any territory that shares a common cultural and language heritage, which the Western Cape does, has a right to self-determination. So all we would need to do is to hold a referendum, and to get 50% plus one in that referendum, we would then go to the Constitutional Court as well as the international community to ratify this democratic election and to proceed down the pathway of negotiating with the South African government for greater autonomy or outright independence for the Cape.
All right, Ganief Hendricks, let's bring you in there. The Independence Party outlining their justification for this particular call. Do you think this is a good idea to solve the problems of the Western Cape?
I think it is a nightmare. Herman Mashaba supports the position that this should not even be entertained, and I was very reluctant to come on this show after he said that it mustn't even be entertained. The Premier of the Western Cape I send a strong signal that the Western Cape government, which is a democratically elected government, has no interest in this. And I've heard about the looting in other parts of the country. Our security forces were fast asleep, and they are fast asleep now that there is an attempt for secession, for treason. They should have acted, and all those in support of this should have been arrested. Because when we fought apartheid and there were the Bantustans and the tricameral parliament, it was the view of the activists that all those in the Bantustans and the tricameral parliament that was carving up South Africa, when the revolution takes place, they should all be hanged. There's no place for such people in South Africa. And there was a CODESA, so there was an agreement not to hang them and not to wipe them off the face of the earth. And now this is rearing its head again. We cannot, can you imagine that a political party swears allegiance to the Constitution when the Sixth Parliament started? And after swearing an oath to obey the Constitution, they now support a frivolous view, that we are debating today, and that amounts to secession. So we have written to the IEC, and I spoke to the chairman of the IEC, that they are also fast asleep, that they have certain responsibilities. They shouldn't allow these posters on every pole in the city of Cape Town, agitating and calling for people to secede. And so that is our strong view on the matter. But we've all, there was a CODESA, there was a negotiated settlement. And I spoke to an editor of a major newspaper this afternoon, and we spoke about the Cape exit. And I told him I'm very worried about it. And they said, why that is, the joke of the year. Now, an editor won't make such a statement. He says, but why are you worried, They are around 14 years and they haven't succeeded. They will never succeed until Jesus comes home. So, that is our position, that we've written to the IEC. We were going to lay charges of treason at the police station. But, we're fighting an election. Yeah. We don't want to be distracted.
Yeah. See, treason, quite a serious crime.
In the democratic
Ganief, I'm saying treason, quite a serious crime. We'll come back to that and unpack it a little bit more as to how does it get to that point of treason for you as our Jama-ah. Still with us tonight, Dr. Corne Mulder as well as Nokuzola Kolwapi. They'll also weigh in on this. Jack Miller stays on, as well as your views tonight on 072-110-5584. Let's take you live. Let's hear what you think. Do you think Western Cape Province being declared an independent state is a good idea to solve the problems of the Western Cape? We'll continue in a moment on Focus. Back with you tonight on In Focus. In the lead up to the November 1st local government election, there's been a push in the Western Cape for the province to be declared independent from South Africa. Do you think a breakaway from South Africa is what the province needs? Give us your views tonight, 072-110-5584. We'll take you live in a moment. Dr. Corne Mulder, you're a lawmaker. You've been in parliament. You've sworn allegiance to the constitution of this country. How do you support a move that seeks to undermine the territorial integrity of the South African state? It's treasonous.
Yes, if we go with the interpretation of Mr. Hendricks, then I guess it's treason, but I'm not taking that too seriously. No, with all due respect, there's nothing that the proponents of self-determination and independence specifically are putting on the table that are outside the Constitution of South Africa or that are not in line with best international practice. It was fascinating to hear Mr. Hendricks just now say that the idea should not be entertained. And there is Mr. Hendricks at the moment entertaining the idea. If Mr. Hendricks doesn't want to entertain the idea, he's obviously welcome to go. But that's not a strange reaction. This is a normal reaction. People sometimes react in this way. They don't want to understand. They don't want to look the facts straight in the face. The whole idea of independence of the Cape is not about dealing with the problems of the Western Cape. It's not about how do we solve the problems of the Western Cape. This is about people exercising their internationally recognized right to self-determination, to determine their own future. With all due respect, not only the Cape, but we talk about on behalf of the Western Cape, but I think many South Africans have had enough of this government. This government has indicated clearly that they're incompetent. They've not been able to govern South Africa. They've destroyed the country. But I'm not there to speak on behalf of others. We're speaking on behalf of what's happening in the Western Cape specifically. So, first of all, South Africa is not a normal country in the sense that if you look at it, if you look at our history, we are an artificial construct created by a colonial power in 1910, when it drew a colonial boundary telling us all that we are all South Africans. You know, when the Constitution was written in 1994, During that process, an ad was posted in the newspapers, and it said the following. It was an interesting thing. Let me just read what that ad said. At that time, it said South Africa, 20 million women, 18 million men, 8 religions, 25 church groups, 31 cultural groups, 14 languages, 9 racial groups, 1 country. A very diverse society. Now, if the writers of the Constitution and if the ANC was prepared long time ago to create some kind of a federal structure in South Africa where different communities and different areas of South Africa had a lot of say in determining their own future, then maybe the new South Africa would have succeeded. But it didn't. It's a failure. It's a failing state at the moment. And because of that reality, more and more parts of South Africa, but let me speak on behalf of the Western Cape, has come to the realization that our future does not lie within the current dispensation and that we would like to opt for independence. The Constitution makes provision in Section 235, as was already proven, that one could legally, within the framework of the Constitution, take that idea further and try to enhance it. And that's exactly what we are doing.
Yeah. But if there is foreign occupation or colonial rule, then you can apply the succession rules. We are now under constitutional democracy.
No, constitutional democracy. We don't have a constitutional democracy in the true sense of the word. We've got tyranny of the majority. And that's why people are reacting in such a way against the ANC. And I see Mr. Hendricks has left us. But he can leave us. But he won't be able to shy away from this reality. You know, the mere fact is that in the last 12 months, more than 800,000 people in the Western Cape have joined the movement for Cape Exit. They've signed membership in which they undertook to support the idea of independence, and they undertook to vote for independence in a referendum. A year ago, we would not have had this discussion, not at all. But today, we are discussing it, and it's becoming a more and more relevant topic every day in South Africa, because people now realize that this is something that is happening here. Yeah. We say we want to address this in a constitutional manner, we want to address this in a peaceful manner, and we think it's absolutely essential that the people of the Western Cape would be allowed to express their will, and that is why a referendum is part of this process, and the Constitution makes provision for that.
All right.
Section 127 of the Constitution makes provision for a referendum. The Western Cape Constitution makes provision for a referendum. Yeah. And if the Democratic Alliance opposes this, then the electorate must take note of that as well.
Certainly. You do know that a national referendum can only be called by the president, but of course the premier can hold a provincial referendum.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So the premier of the Western Cape is entitled to call a provincial referendum. This matter deals with the province, and surely the people in the province should be allowed to express their views, and let me hear what they are saying. First of all, now we've got an election, and let's see what happens in the election. The election is not about independence necessarily in total, it's about local government. But people will also have the opportunity.
Is it not, though, and it is a pity that Mr. Hendricks has actually left. He took you on your word, really, and really left us tonight. Hopefully we can try and get him back.
He can run away, but he will not escape this.
I'll come back to you in a moment. Let me bring in Nokuzola. Your view on what the independence movement is calling for and what the Freedom Front Plus is supporting. Do you think it's a bad idea, or simply that it is something that is not only anti-ANC but implicitly anti-black?
Good night. Good evening, everybody, the listeners, the people that are viewing, and the part of the panel. For me, as the leader of Ikhwezi Political Movement, we came in existence because of our constitution that allows us to come in existence when we feel that us as the local people, we feel that we are not well attended by the national led organizations. But even if it's like that, we have not yet even consider that, because I could say it is so dismaying to find that at this time we're only 25 years post, apartheid, and we are still exercising the democracy of this country, where we still believe in one country, promoting unity instead of isolation and segregation, because that's what we voted for unity and integration. Because some of these problems that we are still attesting to, we are still feeling the consequences of. It is true, the apartheid system that was here in this country. We are only 25 years away from the apartheid system, from the race issues. But all of a sudden, we still find people that doesn't even want to give it a try as equivalent as the term that the apartheid was still existing in this country. So for us, we still believe this segregation and this isolation, it is exactly the root cause of the racism that makes people, the others, they find themselves better because they are rich and they can afford themselves. Because I do believe, even if they can say it's more than 800, whatever amount of people that they've signed the petition to be self-determining, but I still believe that I'm sure previously disadvantaged people were disregarded, were not included to this whole type of a system that these other parties are for them. Because even for me as Nokuzola in this place of Ibito, I never even knew there's that kind of, of a policy, that kind of a mindset. It means then it is there in Cape Town mainly, or even in a different type of towns. So I'm trying to say it's something that whether they can say there's a petition of so many people that have signed it, but for me, I still believe that it is too early and it is not something that is needed, especially us as women. I feel that it is more disempowering, self-inflicting. It's so disempowering, and it also reminds us where we are coming from. Whilst we are still in this age, we can still remember very well how segregation has caused in this country, how it has made these resources that we still want to have an access of equality to. It has affected us so much. We are still on that to unwind the damage that has been caused. But still, all of a sudden, there are people that are still thinking of taking us back to that same system that it's a race. And I'm still questioning myself, how much other provinces are contributing to the GDP of this country? For us, as in the Western Cape, we boast about 200 billion. What other countries are other provinces are contributing to the GDP? Right. For us to feel that the 200 billion that is contributed in the Western Cape, it's enough for us to determine and shunt away the other people, especially the previously disadvantaged people.
Do you think they should be granted the referendum that they are calling for, and maybe it will reveal something? Because if you look at the demographics of the Western Cape, 49% of the people in the Western Cape, it said they describe themselves as colored, 33% describe themselves as black Africans, 17% as white, and 1% as Indian or Asian. And Afrikaans is a plurality language that's spoken as the first language by the 50% of the people. So they are saying the Western Cape is different from other provinces in the sense that we also speak our own language and our ideology is different. So we should be allowed at least to have this referendum and let those people decide how they want to self-determine.
No, we are against us as Ikhwezi. We are against because we are standing here for unity, so that we can be able to transfer skills. Because you know what, the segregation it takes away the freedom of movement, the freedom of access. It's more like people are being taken back to a concentration camp. For me and for us as Ikhwezi, we are against. We are not even how many people have signed the referendum as the Western Cape people, but we still say that still the demographics, they don't even prove that, because amongst that 33% that are colored, how many of them are the poor of the poorest? They were still previously disadvantaged. So this will never assist to them, other than it will be more damaging the humankind that we still have to exercise in this country. I'm not shunting away the looting and the corruption and everything, but the main thing, still, this is not the way to solve the problems of humankind in this country. We are still promoting the isolation and segregation that we fought for the previous years.
All right,
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming back with us tonight, because I need you in this conversation. I need to hear your voice as well coming through. Jack, I'm coming to you in a moment. We also have Paige calling us in Welkom on the line tonight. We'll take that call from Paige. You can send your views also tonight, 072-110-5584. The conversation continues in a moment on In Focus. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're live with us tonight on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Of course, the build-up is to the November 1st local government elections. And there have been a lot of debates and a lot of campaign promises and campaign messaging, one of which, of course, is the Cape Exit movement that is pushing for the independence of the Western Cape province. Let's go to Paige now on the line in Welkom. Paige, good evening and thank you very much for your time. What's your contribution in this conversation? Do you wish for the breakaway of the Western Cape? Would that prove anything?
No. Good evening, sir, and your partner. I believe we shouldn't be even entertaining the topic at all, because I think rich people are trying to protect their interest in the Cape, because I don't think poor people have been consulted. Where do they get the mandate from? Because the majority of people are poor, they are suffering there. So now few rich people want to own themselves because they don't want to live side by side to build the nation that you want to build. You cannot go back to segregation again, where people will be on their own corners because they are protecting their richness. It's time we come together, build the same nation, no matter the problem you might be facing as a nation. You can't be segregated. Instead, you must be fighting for unity now instead of segregation. So anything that supports segregation, we should not at all entertain.
So, Paige, what do you make of the argument that says the DA was given a mandate to govern by a majority of the people in the Western Cape because they were rejecting the ANC governance, and therefore that is an indication that the electorate in the Western Cape does not belong or does not, I suppose, fall under the thinking of the rest of South Africa?
It's not the right thinking, because they were giving them the right to govern in the Cape within South Africa, not away from South Africa. So, and I don't think they have a 100% majority. I don't believe so. So those people, their families are across the country. They are part of this country. They want those people to govern within the country, not on their own. If the freedom was fought from Cape up to Limpopo. So you cannot come and fight for your own corner there. It can't be.
All right.
It can't be.
Paige, I appreciate your call. Thank you very much for coming through. Paige in Welkom. Jack, the principles of solidarity and the principles of equality seemingly are colliding with this principle of wanting to break away. But not only that, I want you to just address that issue. It's been raised by Paige, it's been raised by Nokuzola as well. Where did you get your mandate for this referendum? I know you held your own unofficial referendum in which you're saying the majority of those people say they want to break away.
No, not at all. I mean, the reason we're all having this debate here and this discussion this evening is because a very esteemed polling agency, which was commissioned by the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, did an incredibly thorough poll. I mean, the polling, we need to accept that polling is an accepted political method of determining people's opinions, and the polling was done across all ethnic groups, across all income groups living in the Western Cape, and the numbers were resounding. And the numbers that we saw last year were a little bit lower than what they are now. We think that political events over the last few months have certainly played into people being more in favor of Cape independence now. But we're seeing almost 60% of people living in the Western Cape are in favor of a referendum on Cape independence. And it doesn't
I must apologize. I didn't go into the details of this particular poll that you say was conducted. I just did see the numbers, I think close to 58% or close to 60 who support the referendum, and I think 37% or so who are saying they definitely would support the breakaway. But can you break that down for us as far as the demographics of those people who you conducted this with? Or the independent movement conducted this with?
Yes, by far the largest group that supports Cape independence is the colored population at around about 60% of the polling. And then the white and the black population is actually similar, both polling at around 20% there. So this is across the entire spectrum. And it's actually quite reflective of the demographics of the Western Cape. As you said, colors are the majority. Then the black population is second, whites smaller than that. So it's if you look at what the polls show, is that it's irrelevant what your ethnic group is. The majority of people living in the Western Cape are in favor of governing themselves. And the thing is, we need to look at issues far deeper than race. I think, for almost 30 years now, this is the problem. We were promised a rainbow nation in 1994. And the way that the government shuts down debate in this country is they use this one word. They try to tar and feather you with this word racist, because then all debate disappears. But go and speak to the black people, go and speak to the colored people, go and speak to the various ethnic groups in the Cape who are very much in favor of making the Cape an independent country, not because of skin color. In fact, we at the Cape Independence Party have been saying this for 14 years. The Western Cape is the true rainbow nation. And we're not only fighting against the ANC regime, we're fighting against a centralized system which was imposed on us by the British Empire in 1910, was taken over by the apartheid government in 1948, and has now been taken over by the ANC regime in 1994. What people need to understand is we're fighting the entire colonial system, It doesn't matter if it's the ANC in charge or the apartheid government in charge or the British Empire in charge. This centralized political system called the Union of South Africa has failed every single ethnic group through different stages of its history. So if we want to see black, white, colored, Indian and Asian brothers and sisters living together neighborly with respect for each other, we need to decentralize politics down to local communities. And let me add, the Cape Independence Party or the Cape Independence Movement in the Western Cape is not the only group calling for independence. There is a very strong movement in KwaZulu-Natal calling for KZN independence. The Abu Tembu tribe in the Eastern Cape is calling for Eastern Cape independence. The Sothos living in Lesotho feel that they got hard done by when the Queen divided up the Union of South Africa and they lost territory. There are Tswanas living in the north of South Africa which want to be part of Botswana because the standard of living for their brothers and sisters in Botswana is higher than it is for Tswanas living in South Africa. So there are many, many groups around this country that have a problem with the way the ANC is governing South Africa. This is not a race issue. This is a corruption and a failed political system. And that is what we're fighting against. We need to forget race and start putting people first. Yeah. It didn't work in apartheid. It's not working now.
It's not a race issue, Ganief. This is a system that is not working, right? The current dispensation believes in large centralized governance, right? This particular movement would like to see a more capitalist, free market economic approach. Ganief?
Yeah, look, I find it, a fairy tale that the so-called colored community would support such a move. Taking into account that for the past 20 years, they've been governed by the DA. They have repeatedly voted for the DA. And now they want to, because they are oppressed and they're the Cinderella of South Africa, especially on the Cape Flats, they now want to leave and they want to live in a separate country. That is, for me, a fantasy. We also hear that the two criteria to call a referendum in terms of international norms is culture and language. Are you telling me that the people in the beachy suburbs and the leafy suburbs and the people living in the 300 informal settlements and those living on the Cape Flats have a common culture? The answer is definitely no. Let's talk about language. Are you telling me that the people in the 300 informal settlements, in the beachy and leafy suburbs, in your canal walks and your central town districts, that they have the same language? Look, Afrikaans is obviously a dominant language. It is. There are two versions of Afrikaans. The Cape Flats people don't speak the language of Plattekloof, the same Afrikaans, or of the Strand, and where Afrikaans is spoken at a very high level. So just looking at that, there is no grounds in terms of so-called international opportunities, to call for self-determination on the basis of culture and language. There was a time when Afrikaans was considered an oppressive language, and we had the Soweto riots in Johannesburg. And you want to tell me now that, culture, that we all share the same culture and we all say the same language. That is a ridiculous position. Let's talk about the fact that we have a fiscus that takes money from all the 9 provinces, not only the Western Cape. They take more money from the city of Johannesburg than they don't spend on Johannesburg for the fiscus. So the Western Cape, some figures have been thrown around, and it is ridiculous.
200 billion in taxes, I think.
That we are entertaining this debate at all.
No. Let's get to the reality.
Dr. Mulder, hold on a second. I'll give you a chance to respond. Ganief, finish your thought. I'm going to give you an opportunity even to respond.
Thank you.
So after having heard the so-called support for the referendum and support, 37% support for the breakaway, it is certainly an attempt to give the Cape Party some relevance, and it is very disappointing that honourable members of our parliament who sworn allegiance to the Constitution wants to break South Africa into the 7 areas that have been said to want to break away from South Africa. Yeah. Wasn't the liberation struggle all about a unified South Africa? Wasn't the Constitution all about bringing us all together, being one nation? And what about, the aspirations that we have for a United States of Africa? Yeah. How will South Africa have any credibility if it allows the country to be broken up into 7, not Bantustans, but something else? I mean, we will all look like fools.
Right.
So the Freedom Front Party, with respect, and the Cape Party wants South Africa to look like fools, and we're not going to allow that.
Ganief, we're out of time. We're out of time. Dr. Mulder, when we come back, I want you to respond to the criteria that Ganief is raising around the culture and the language that does not meet, according to Ganief, the muster of a referendum, the 200 billion rand taxes, and the other taxes that are collected elsewhere on the country, and the Western Cape benefiting from the fiscus, and of course the whole question of unity when we come back in a moment. We'll take your thoughts as well. 072-110-5584 before we wrap up this conversation. In Focus continues in a moment. Love and in Focus tonight, Newzroom Afrika channel 405. Our debate continues on the self-determination of the Western Cape. Is it synonymous with the question of independent statehood? That is, of course, part of what we're talking about tonight. Jack Miller, Ganief Hendricks, Nokuzola Kolwapi, as well as Dr. Corne Mulder. Before Dr. Corne Mulder comes in, let's read some of your WhatsApp messages coming through tonight. Gavin and George saying we need a unity rather than a separation. And separating the province will be disastrous for the poor of that province. Poorest of the poor are currently receiving substandard services in that province. The people who are for self-determination are the rich to protect their interests. Majority of the citizens in that province don't even know about that proposal. It's a waste of time to even entertain such an idea. Anyway, who are the leaders of the organization? Where did they get their mandate? That's Gavin and George. Kwande Nyembe, saying Western Cape belongs to the people of South Africa, not a select few who want to disassociate with the whole because of selfish reasons and their inability to win national elections. Thank you very much. Keep them coming. 072-110-5584. We'll take those. Dr. Corne Mulder, here's an opportunity then for you to respond to those issues that Ganief is raising. First, on the criteria to meet the criteria for a referendum.
No, let me start off by first of all say I'm happy that Mr. Hendricks came back into the debate, because that's the way to deal with it. This is not going to go away. This is a reality, and it's becoming more and more of a reality, and it needs to be dealt with. I'm a little bit amazed. I understand that there's a lot of apprehension, perhaps, because many people have not thought about this whole idea. Self-determination, and specifically independence, has got nothing to do with rich or poor. You don't create a country for rich people or for poor people. You create a country for the people of a geographical area. That's the international best practice. It has happened throughout the world. If people are concerned about the poorest of the poor, and we all are, then the question would be, why after 27 years of democratic rule by this government are people poor? Are people without jobs? Do we have the corruption? Do we have all the problems? Because the ANC, with all the ideals that the Constitution promised, failed. They failed dismally. They didn't bring prosperity to the people. They didn't create jobs. They brought corruption. They brought all the bad things to South Africa. Now, when we talk about independence for the Cape, obviously, the people of the Cape should be allowed to express their free will. And if Mr. Hendricks is correct that there's no support, then there's nothing to worry about. Then let's have the referendum and let the people then say we don't want that. Why are we concerned about that? You see, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. Independence has got nothing to do with segregation. It's got nothing to do with isolation. It's exactly the opposite. Just imagine what can be achieved if we really allow South Africa to become what it should be. If we talk about unity and diversity, South Africa is not one country. We are an artificial construct by colonial power 100 years, more than 100 years ago. So the reality is that we should go the right route. Now, if you look at the Constitution in terms of referendums, Mr. Hendricks is not correct. There's no prescription in the Constitution on what item or what thing or what question you're entitled to have a referendum. The Constitution merely says the Premier has the right to call a referendum. And that can be done, and it should be done. Let the people express themselves. Up to this day, the people in the Western Cape have expressed themselves over many elections. That's why the ANC has never won at the polls in the Western Cape. Yeah. More than 70% of the people in the Western Cape since 1994 has clearly said we are not going to vote for the ANC. Yeah. We do not want to be governed by the ANC. We do not want to be governed by policies created at the Thule House and the Union buildings. We want to determine our own destiny. Yeah. And in this election that will be on the 1st of November, my prediction is the ANC is going to do the worst that they've ever done in the Western Cape. And that will poll and the results will show. I'm convinced of that. So this whole idea is getting more and more traction. That's why we are discussing it. And obviously we need to interact with one another. We need to convince one another. I honestly believe, I'm concerned that Mr. Hendricks wants to lay charges against the Freedom Front Plus. We are acting within the Constitution. Section 235 makes it possible for people to strive for self-determination.
Let's go through Section 235, General Provisions, Chapter 14.
Yes, the right, Section 2.
Exactly. The right of South African people as a whole to self-determination, yes, as manifested in this Constitution, does not preclude, within the framework of this right, recognition of the notion of the right of self-determination of any community sharing a common cultural and language heritage. This is the issue that Mr. Hendricks is raising. Absolutely. But within a territorial entity in the Republic, yes, or in any other way determined by the national legislation. So, in essence, you would still need to change the legislation to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's an oversight by the national government that there's no such legislation because they are not serious about that. But we are very serious about this. Is there anyone in South Africa that wants to claim that the people in the Western Cape doesn't share a certain culture, a certain cultural heritage? We all know that Afrikaans and other languages are the dominant languages in the Western Cape. People know that the Western Cape is different. That's why it's the only province that has not been governed by the ANC since 1994. It's a clearly defined territorial entity as well. If you look internationally how countries develop and how countries become independent, there are a plethora of examples of how it's done internationally. Obviously, We would like to do this in a peaceful manner. Now, Mr. Hendricks comes along and he says he laid a charge against the Freedom Front Plus at the IEC. I'm a bit amazed. Nothing will happen in that. Why didn't he lay a charge against the EFF? Are those his friends? Because the EFF, they are the party that said, we are coming to Parliament to bring the revolution to Parliament. They are not believing in any constitutional dispensation that we believe in, and all of us together. So, with all due respect, we are taking this further, and people shouldn't be concerned. Let the people express themselves in the referendum. Let's hear what the people say. But you know how these things work. You can delay the process, but you will not stop it. Once people have decided they would like to take their own destiny in their own hands, they want to take their own decisions, you can delay them, but you won't stop them. Go and look at all the examples. Go and look what happened in Sudan. Look at the creation of South Sudan. Look at the situation that happened in Ethiopia. But you know, there are other countries, and quite often we are told South Africa's got the best constitution in the world. That's not correct. It's not true. It's a good constitution. It's not the best. You know why? Because we are trying to put a very diverse society under a central government where everything is centralized. It's not working. Nigeria, with its federal structures, got a much better constitution in recognizing the diversity. Ethiopia, go and have a look at Section 39 in the Ethiopian constitution in terms of the process that they allow for referendums where the different communities in Ethiopia can express themselves. So obviously, we want to live in peace and harmony, and people must understand this has got nothing to do with race. This is not a racial issue. This is an issue of a group of people in a specific geographical area that wants to express themselves and have the right to govern themselves.
Dr. Mulder, I've given you a whole half section of this particular segment. I've got to give Mam Nokuzola an opportunity to come in as well. Mam Nokuzola, let's hear your views. Can we then deduce simply by the results of the local government elections over the past couple of terms to say that the people of the Western Cape have given this independence a go-ahead?
For me, I think already for us having a local government, as our constitution has allowed us to have our own local parties in order we can do the self-determination in our own local municipalities and provinces. I think that is enough for us to exercise self-determination instead of we do this segregation of this referendum that the Omiso Dr. Mulder is bringing and is alluding to. For me, I feel this will be very much of this independent thing. This will create a very much bureaucratic red tape nightmare. I allude again, emphasizing we are coming from the TBVC states where we felt that it was not okay. Us as women, we are here to say we're inclusive. We are here to exchange the skills to each other. We are here to exchange the intellectual property from each other that was caused to fail by means of that apartheid system that was in. Tell me, if we feel that Western Cape is better enough than Limpopo, better enough than KZN, better enough than Eastern Cape, then where are we heading to? Why we feel that there are people that are jealous about what they are contributing, as if Ubuntu has just fly away from their mindset. Where are we going to benefit from the tourism economy that we are here as us also previous disadvantaged people? Because we know Western Cape is very strong also in the tourism sector and economies. And we understand that mainly people, they are going around for adventure. They are going around for seeing other cultures and languages and everything. If they want to exclude themselves from the greater South Africa we fought for, all of us, we voted for this democracy where we say South Africa is a sovereign one state where accommodates the 9 provinces. If then we start to think of separating each province to another, what then do we think about our constitution that we are here for? For me, I feel this is the real disaster where it takes away the freedom of movement, the freedom of access, the development and economic growth that we are still looking for. It takes away the movement of goods and the movement of human capital. It starts now to be centralized to the people that feel enough that for them, they are not prepared to exchange. They are not prepared to be inclusive. And I feel that it's very much against for women, because us as women, The minute it starts, then it's take away that whole thing, us as women, that we want to be inclusive as the people that are solid in starting and making this whole world to be like this. We are the ones that give birth.
Right.
For me, tourism will be very much undermined if we started to entertain this referral.
Ma'am Nokuzola, I appreciate it. Unfortunately, that's the time that we have for this conversation tonight. We're going to have to leave it there. Jack Miller, Dr. Corne Mulder, Ganief Hendricks, as well as Ma'am Nokuzola Kolwapi. I appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming through. Of course, it's only the beginning of this debate. It goes on and it continues on various other platforms being, of course, pushed by the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. And, of course, there are those who are opposed to it, including those who are still vying for positions in these local government elections. That's where we leave it for tonight. Thank you for your engagement. When we continue